You're watching Wall Street Confidential on the Street.com TV. Our topic goes into subprime versus retail. What's more important to focus on? Jim Cramer, you have a little bit of insight on this.
June should have been the month where the subprime issue burst all over. It should have been the month where whatever the bears have been worried about from beginning in January should have. It's been 7 months now. This is 6 months. We've had ample opportunity for this issue to really wreck the rest of the economy. At a certain point, there's going to be a judgment made. And the judgment is, if it hasn't wrecked it yet, it won't. And I think that judgment needs to be made on these June numbers. These June numbers were extraordinarily good. And what it showed you is the impact is much less in real life for the companies than any of the analysts are saying. When you hear subprime, soon I need you to start thinking about the rising price of oil. I need you to start thinking about the rising taxes. I need you to start thinking about your heating bill. It's become one of those issues like that, which should have wrecked the consumer, and it didn't. Now, I fell prey because I'm so close to Sears and look at Home Depot. It's obviously those are execution. After this numbers, we now know those are just execution issues. Those companies are executing poorly. It has nothing to do with subprime.
It's a housing issue in some cases.
Right. Well, it's an issue of the people are going to other stores. They're going to Lowe's and they're going to Walmart. They're not going home. It's execution. The other thing is that one of the things that bothers me immensely is we'll have these sell-offs in the last hour, and they will be viewed as every bit as legitimate as the rest of the day's trading. I'm now doing some work which shows that the last 40% of these sell-offs on these days that occur in the last hour are repealed almost immediately. There's an element of falseness to them. And what I think people have to do is recognize that the conjunction of the bear subprime arguments with the giant decline in the market is coloring a lot of the coverage. And it's therefore swaying guys like even me to have doubts. And while it's always good to doubt your thesis, it's important to remember that the clock is ticking on this issue as a negative. And in a few months, it will be one of those things where people are saying, why were we so focused on it? It turned out to be a pool of mortgages. Someone mentioned this on Real Money, no more than $500 billion. Now, when I say no more than $500 billion, we're talking about a multi-trillion dollar market. And a percentage of those $500 billion that went bad, which seems to be between 5 and 15%, the 10 to 15% high is because of fraud. There was a lot of fraud in this market. But when you take a 10 to 15%, 15 would be very high versus what the bears are saying, you say 15% of the $500 billion are corrupted, okay? Then you're starting to talk about a very small number. You're talking about, versus the U.S. economy. The number of defaults came out today. I couldn't believe how few there were. There were only 150,000. We're a big country. There's 310 million people in our country. There's a huge number of homes. You're telling me 150,000 defaults on homes? Well, shouldn't it be like 500,000? Again, we're blowing an issue out of proportion. Yeah. And it's important to recognize that so far the fallout has been limited to New Century Financial.
I want to go back to that thesis earlier, if I may, about the 40% trading in the last half of the session. So does that mean that as someone who's watching the markets, the first half of the session is more indicative of where the market's actually
the buyback cease in the last half hour. The futures, there are whole programs, they were used to be called Ridex programs, where if the market's down at 3, you've got to sell. Yeah. So we're seeing a kind of a market that is saying, let's have the real takeaway here. Put in your bids for stock at 3:45. You really want to buy a Deere? It's at 124. Put in a 123 bid. It's working as a style and a mechanism because this last hour is phony.
Something to think about for sure. Thanks a lot, Jim Cramer, here on Wall Street Confidential. Thanks for watching.